Sure. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Anne. It's an honor to join you this morning, all the way from London. It's quite early in the morning here in London, but it's great to join all of you. So I'm Michelle Chivunga, CEO of the Global Policy House. I also advise several governments around the world, looking at the emerging markets, especially in terms of in relation to emerging technology, with a focus on blockchain, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and other data-related technologies. Our main focus really is to support, the adoption of useful technologies in terms of driving trade and intra-regional trade across the continent. We're also working with the African Union and the CFTA Secretariat, where we are looking at digital trade protocol, as well as other protocols as well to support the implementation of the CFTA. Now, in terms of our other focus as a company, we work very globally as well, where we're supporting the adoption, as I said, of technologies, the safe adoption of technologies like blockchain, and also making sure that we can have, collaborations between international markets and the African markets. Our core focus is definitely the African markets, and this is where we are looking to implement a number of blockchain solutions ourselves, and also working in partnership with the international companies to introduce these solutions. At the same time, influencing around what happens with things like regulation, which I think is pretty critical given what's happening in the industry. And so we're working very, very closely with central banks, regulators on things like central bank digital currencies, and other areas of innovation that we think might be relevant for the continent. Thank you so much.
Now, in regard to you, Michelle, you alluded to this earlier in the introduction. You've done a lot of work, or you continue to do a lot of work on the continent and beyond. You're currently in London. But I would like you to sort of share with us the work that you're doing with the African Union, right? Because when we talk about AfCFTA, this is something that was envisioned, the Africa We Want Agenda 2063. And that's how the AfCFTA was born. So what is the work that you're doing with the African Union, really around what you talked about, emerging technology, blockchain, AI, digital transformation of our businesses on the continent? If you could share that with the audience so that we can get a glimpse about the current work that you're doing and the future trends, so that these businesses can be able to do that, and also governments can have the right policy to make sure that we are driving digital trade on the continent. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you very much, Anne. And absolutely, I think it's kind of one of the most exciting times. I think the last couple of years doing this work on the continent, I think as a young African myself, one of the most exciting things is actually the CFTA, because the CFTA really paves the way for us to be innovative, paves the way for us to drive the agenda. In terms of what actually happens on the continent, and how we, promote what happens on the continent, promote our goods and services, not just within sort of Africa. Of course, the primary ambition is to make sure we can have better intra-regional trade, trade with each other, trade with our neighbors within Africa. It's absolutely fundamental, but also it gives us a very strong competitive advantage in terms of trading with the world. Right. So it doesn't matter what sector you're in. I'm in the emerging tech space, but you can be in agriculture, which is very sexy, I have to say. I wish I knew something about agriculture, trust me, because then, that is where the real money is. And it's very important, I think, for us to be thinking about how we leverage what the CFTA is actually positioning us to take advantage of as businesses. So number one is important because of the CFTA and the work that we're doing, where we're looking at, looking at the digital trade protocols and rules that we can actually help to facilitate an enabling environment, so that, operators and the public sector and private organizations can actually trade in an environment that is conducive. Number one, that is very, very important. So we need to be able to provide the right frameworks, the right policies, the right regulatory structures to ensure that, we can trade easily, right, between each other, but we can also trade easily with international counterparts, and places African businesses in very, very competitive positions, right, so that you can actually leverage value, what I call value. Now, what do I mean by value? Value doesn't mean where we're just exporting raw materials. Value means that we are actually looking at exporting value-add products and services that have been processed any manufactured in Africa. So made in Africa, processed in Africa, and where you're getting actually the value that you have. So for me, the CFTA is an avenue, a catalyst that is going to be able to enable you to actually do that and actually get more returns for your products. That's number one. And then second, one of the most important things is that we have clarity around regulation, right? Clarity around how we operate in certain markets, clear rules around data sharing or data privacy. This is very, very important because we have some countries in Africa, yes, have some clear, data rules, but we also have to have that quite even across the continent. So also it's about ownership. For me, I'm very big on ownership, right? It's important that as Africans, you own companies, you own products, you own code, right? We are in the emerging tech space. We work on code, we write code, we source code. It's very, very important that we're able to own that code and we're able to leverage the advantages that comes with us producing that code, right? And actually also even selling that code across the world is also very important, where we have competitive advantage, again, like I said. And also it's about, how can you monetize? So do we have access to data? Do we control data? Do we manage data? Can we monetize? That data is also pretty significant. So everything I've described is something that we've been looking at with the CFTA Secretariat, and certainly when it comes to things like e-commerce and digital, what I call the digital platform economy. Again, we're looking at that very, very strongly with the African Union. We're looking at the e-commerce strategy and things like that so that we can actually provide strategies actually fit for purpose for Africa to thrive. And then of course, the other work that we're doing is also making sure we're supporting young people and women, especially because our continent is very much made up of, young people and then women who are very entrepreneurial, who are very tech driven, who are very, very entrepreneurial naturally. So for us, we want to make sure that we invest in talent and we support that talent so that, the talent is what is going to generate you the GDP that you're looking for. So if you do not invest in that talent in your countries, you're not going to be able to leverage the opportunities that are there. So for us, it's important we invest into the talent. We make sure that we are supporting by actually providing knowledge around how can you interact with things like blockchain, right? How can you learn about smart contracts? How can you learn about artificial intelligence? Because these are the areas that are really going to be quite significant in future. In fact, they already are. And these are areas where you're seeing some of the big countries around the world are actually competing, or you have what you call digital wars, right, between each other because of tech, right? So tech is going to be pretty important, and tech is spread across any sectors, can be applied in any sectors. But the important message, that I do want to leave everybody with, especially in regard to trade, we need to be able to digitize and move away from, sort of paper-based documentation, for example. We have to digitize, and we have to look at the digitized system from end to end. It is not just digitizing little pieces here and there. We have to make sure we can have end-to-end digitalization, methods. We have to look at standards. We have to look at interoperability. We have to make sure all this stuff is brought together. And that is some of the work that we're doing with the African Union and the CFTA Secretariat.
So my question for you is, what do you think, or what are the right policies that you think African countries need to provide to ensure the growth of digital trade? And the focus here, my question really is around women and youth, right? What do now, the AfCFTA, but now what do the countries, the nations, the African countries need to do in regards to policy, specifically women in trade, so that we can unlock this potential of digital trade, which we say is the great equalizer. It's going to open opportunities for the young people of Africa and the women of Africa. Please share your thoughts with us.
Yes, thank you. And I think just to begin with, looking at the overarching picture, which is, of course, coming from the AU and the CFTA and all the organs that are really driven to make sure that we can deliver on the ambitions of the CFTA. We have for example, the team is very much looking at the women and youth protocol. So for me, I'm very convinced, because the sheer fact that there's actually a women and youth protocol, it shows the seriousness at that level in terms of government level to actually support more women and young people to interact. And I have seen all the work that has gone with the youth division, for example, at the African Union. I mean, they've been very, very active for the last couple of years, where they're looking at practical solutions to support young people. So this includes things like access to finance, right? Which is one of the biggest barriers. How do you get access to portal money while you're growing your business? Because if without access to capital, without access to information, without access to data, as a business, it's very, very difficult to scale and to grow. So that is number one. So in terms of policies and that countries need to make sure that they have, I think obviously have to center around, their growth sectors in those countries. So we have to make sure that one, there is an enabling environment. So you're clear about the regulation, right, that is there. Whether you're thinking about regulating businesses that are in the new kind of emerging fields of tech, or whether you're regulating traditional businesses, for regulators in those countries, it's important that you provide some clarity around the regulations. So that is very, very important. And then, of course, it's very, very important that, the youth and young people have access. When I say access, it doesn't mean, we're talking about, things like data, right? Even just having access to data. In some African countries, very expensive. It's very difficult. You're not connected to the internet, so you're not leveraging what is happening within the digital economy in the first place. So, I think Google did a report, and the IFC did a report recently where they actually predicted something like 180 billion worth of value can be untapped from the internet economy in Africa. Right. But in order to untap that value in the internet economy, it's important that we have the right infrastructure and connectivity is available. So again, governments and sort of regulators have to make sure that in their countries, you're able to actually provide that access through better infrastructure, both soft and hard infrastructure. You're able to provide access to knowledge and skills for young people and women to actually take advantage of. We must actually make it a purpose of ours to make sure that we mainstream women, right? In Africa, we have to mainstream women, because if you mainstream, what do I mean by mainstream women? You have to make sure that women are active and participants in key critical sectors in our economies in Africa, right? So if I'm in Nigeria, and you know that in Nigeria, there's a big, adoption of emerging tech space. Nigeria is second in the world when it comes to cryptocurrency adoption, I can tell you, right? But how many of those players are also women, right? In terms of gender that Adetutu was talking about. We have to make sure that there's an equal balance as well. We have to make sure that women are participants. When I say participants, I'm not talking about consumption. I'm talking about, you being able to actually produce things, you be able to manufacture, you actually to write code, right? And that is why for us at Global Policy House, we purposely, in your country, and you were there, we purposely launched the 10 million women in Web3 and digital trade initiative, because there we want to mainstream women. We want to make sure women are active participants, are producing goods and services, and they are untapping value from that economy. So for me, the policies and the frameworks have to enable that, right? Have to be in place so that we can make sure that, both young people and women are able to actually participate, right, at equal level playing field in Africa, but also outside of Africa. So if we have young people and women who are trying very hard, and I know we have, Africa has had the hugest amount of investments going into startups, right? But most of that investment is not necessarily coming from within Africa. Right. And by the way, your investment or people investing in you will also help to drive what happens with your business. They also have to have some level of decision making, right? So, it influences how you do stuff. So for me, it's important that we also encourage an internally driven investment markets, and that is more sustainable, because, the interest, I think, is also trying to grow Africa. So young Africans have to be equipped properly. Young Africans have to work in an environment where the regulations are clear. Those regulations have to look at things like, access to data, the flow of data, look at infrastructure needs, have to make sure that you have access to, particular initiatives that are tailored to women or youth, right, very specifically. And I really give kudos to the African Union Youth Division, because they've done a little bit of work around that. And of course, the CFTA with the CFTA itself is going to enable everything I'm talking about. So for us, we have to get a bit more tailored. We have to mainstream even our regulation. Please, regulators, try and work with the people who are in the industry to make those regulations, because we know what's going on in the industry, right? That is very important. So regulators must not sit in a corner trying to come up with these regulations by themselves. They have to work with the industry, right, to come up with the regulation, especially in our world, in this new world of decentralized digital economy that I'm talking about.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and of course, reminding policymakers that you also want to work with industry. You have to understand what's really going on there, and reminding us that we don't only need to consume, we need to produce. how do we own code? So you mentioned that we need to own code. How do we own code when there's a big push towards open source? Please tell us how we can reap from creativity, but at the same time, encourage collaboration, right? So own versus open code, creativity, owning versus collaboration. Could you share more about what you think about that, Michelle?
Yeah, sure. Fantastic. I have replied to yourself directly, Wango, but I think for the benefit of everyone, I will repeat what I mentioned to you. I think one of the important thing around source code is actually, what is that source code for? Let us ask ourselves, that question first. What are we writing that code for? So one of the mistakes I think, the tech industry or the world where we are developing code, the mistakes that I think a lot of players have made is that they're just developing code. When you develop code, you also have to wonder, what is it that you're developing it for? Are you trying to solve some sort of problem, or, I hope so. Is the ambition to actually try and solve one of the biggest challenges that the world faces, not even just in Africa, right? We have issues around things like food security. We have issues around COVID. We all had issues around COVID. And for me, COVID really pointed out to the world that actually, hold on a minute, we're not really as organized as we thought we were. Right, hold on a minute. You really don't understand your citizens as much as you think you do. In the case of governments, hold on a minute. You really don't get your supply chains as much as you do. There's no transparency. There's no openness about your supply chains. So absolutely, source code. Certain elements of source code can be open source because it is very important that we're able to share. Right, but not everything has to be open source. That is the point I'm trying to make. And where we have creativity and innovation, we must nurture that. And we must understand why, must we protect certain elements and open up others, right? Because when you're opening up others, it provides opportunity for us to come up with solutions to bigger problems. That's why open source code is also quite important in certain scenarios, but not in every scenario. So it is very important to understand why is it that we are even developing that code. If it's something to do with defense and protecting countries or something like that, we're not necessarily looking to share all the data or information. And if it's personal data, right, we talk about privacy all the time. The world, every single person, including myself, I care about my data and my information and who's using it for what, when, why, right? And I must be able to have a say in how my data is being utilized. And currently, not many people around the world actually have that power or that control. Now, it is important that I think, when we're talking about back to the CFTA and the protocols, like Adetutu was saying, it is important that we're looking at things like data protection. We're looking at consumer protection. We're looking at IP. And that is what is happening, in terms of the CFTA. In fact, the team is already pushing ahead on the investment protocol and the IP protocol, right? And looking at how we protect consumer protection. How do we also protect code? Because if we have the geniuses that we have of, like Adetutu was saying, some of the startups that we have on the continent, they are developing solutions. How can we protect? How can we provide access to IP and protections around that IP? Right, it's very, very important. It's the same concept when you're thinking about code, right? It's almost kind of thinking of it as a commodity. You want to protect your commodity, but you also want to be able to use that commodity to untap value, right? So for me, it's very, very important that, yes, we enable creativity, but at the same time, we start to identify and understand what is it that needs protection, what is it that doesn't need protection, or that we need to open up to the world that we can all benefit from, right? So if I have open source code that can help me, to develop a solution that's going to help cure, I don't know, cancer or something, of course, I want to be able to share it, right? I think with the rest of the world. But you have code that is intellectual, property of mine for my company that I have developed that I need to get commercial value from. I have to find a way that, is protecting, and I expect my government and my regulators and my country to be able to provide some protections for my IP as well, right? I think that's the difference as well. We have to think about what is it that we're protecting, why are we protecting it? What do we need to open up so that we can be able to actually untap value more for the country?
Thank you, Michelle, for that clarification. And I think even as you're speaking, I was thinking that's why a lot of these techies need legal advisors and business experts, because I'm in Kenya, a lot of talent. But as you ask, what are you developing that code for, right? What is it for? And at the end of it all, you need to monetize. So you need to have that balance. You need to have that advice to know What do you keep open? What is intellectual property? What is all of that? So thank you very much for sharing. What is your view on data colonialism? Is this something we should be worried about? What are the ways governments can ensure that data collected through tech innovations and digital platforms benefit Africans? Colonization, data colonialism. That's interesting. Okay, go ahead, Michelle.
No, fantastic question. I was just going to say, you know, Sami, I think, yeah, even I will probably be reaching you to discuss how we can look at the, kind of making a little bit more affordable for the African SME. But certainly, I think, no, and that's a great question. Thank you so much. I think this is a question that we debate a lot, actually, in terms of around data. I think, you know, we've all heard that data is the new oil, whatever. What does that actually mean, right? It's also about the quality of data that you've got. So it's not just about having masses and masses amounts of data. Yes, data is probably the most important commodity, I would say, of many countries, right? Because if you've got data and you've got very strong data, as in quality data, then you have leverage, you've got a bit of power, right? And you're able to use that data to do so many different things. I don't even know where to start. And it can help you to monetize and generate all sorts of different revenue streams if you have access to that data. So absolutely, I think, do I have concerns around colonialism when it comes to data? Of course, 100%. I think, you know, for me, especially in the context of the continent, you know, I often say this even in meetings that I have with governments and regulators that, you know, do we actually own data? Where is our data set sitting, right? You know, have we got control of that data? Are we utilizing the data that we have? And believe you me, some of the data that we have, which is lots of data, right, in different circumstances, be it in the healthcare, you know, medical information, medical stuff, we have a lot of data, but that data is also in the format in which it's in. It's not very well, cannot be very well utilized. So it's important that, like I said in the beginning, that we are digitizing. Right, and we're taking that paper-based heavy data and digitizing that information and cleaning up that data and making sure that we can now utilize that data, right? And this is where kind of emerging tech comes in quite strongly, actually, right? If you want to clean up data and you want to read big data sets, as we say, big data, right? You want to look at big data sets for governments, for example, right? And you have that digitized properly. You can use machine learning to read those data sets. So it tells you some trends, right? And then once you have those trends, you have more information about what to do, decision-making, policy making. Very, very important. So absolutely, you know, it's important that we make sure that we have some sort of protections around data, but we don't just bring in regulation and rules that stops us from utilizing that data so that we can actually get some value from it. So it's important in terms of how you determine your data laws, and it's important about, you know, data protections and how data is shared, right? And how do you protect your own data, right? And make sure that data is actually advantageous for Africans. So in the context of the how it can benefit the Africans, one, you have to have access to the right quality data, right? And when you have access to that quality data, you can utilize that quality data to do so many things. You can build new products, you can build new revenue streams, you can untap value, you know, so it's very, very important. I think data is one of the areas, again, that we're looking at under the protocols and how we treat and you know, monetize data as well. I'm pushing heavily on the monetizing data, because I think if you have data just sitting there and you're not really utilizing it for anything, we're missing the point. Whereas the rest of the back to competitive advantage, if you want to be competitive at equal level playing field with other parts of the world, where they have, you know, masses of data and they have organized their data and it's digitized and they're utilizing it, and you don't as a continent, again, you fall into the risk that, you know, the lady who's asked the question, you fall into that risk of where you're again going to be, you know, sort of have some level of colonialism that comes in, right? Because you don't have that competitive advantage around data. So I think it's important as a continent, we get together, which we are doing already, to make sure that we have some clarity around data usage. And it doesn't mean just copy and paste. So we don't want to just go and say, oh, hey, there's GDPR in Europe, right? Let's just take what GDPR and do the same for Africa. No. This cannot work like that. Because in Africa, we've got different countries, right? We have many, many different countries, and all our countries are culturally very different. How we use data is very different. How we respond to each other, the languages we use, all kind of is very, very different. So we have to take it, you know, in the context of Africa and actually develop solutions that actually fit for the continent, but also fit at national level. So at national level, we must get clear around how we look at data and how we, sort of regulate and provide protections around data, if you like.
Thank you, Michelle, for that. Solutions for the continent and the nations. We can't just copy and paste what everyone else is doing. And reminding us that data is king. I come from finance, so for us to be cash flow, everything's about cash. But now we're like data is it. Data is king, but we have to learn how to monetize it. So thank you very much.
Yes, no, I think I'll be very quick as well. I think in terms of opportunity for job creation, I think are absolutely huge for the continent. I actually think this time that we have right now, with the fourth industrial revolution really kicking off, is a chance for Africa to actually lead the world when it comes to things like digital innovation and digital trade. We can easily leapfrog. We don't have challenges around things like legacy systems that we have to worry about. I think if we can get ourselves organized when it comes to things of, the policies and the legal structures, then actually it provides an opportunity for young people who we know are already very creative in Africa, but the women who are already, pretty much providing the bread and butter on the table, the informal sector. You talked about the rural sector again, earlier on, and which is very, very critical. If we can help to support that informal economy, which, by the way, I still ask many governments in Africa around the world, how much GDP do we get from the informal sector? And I've never really had a clear answer, and that needs to change. We have all the tools and the digital tools to actually change that so that we can start to measure to see what is happening in the informal sector and how we can actually help that informal sector to generate even more GDP. So for me, in terms of job creation, let's not forget that there is a whole new economy, the digital economy, the e-commerce economy that is actually going to generate billions and billions of, GDP for us. And that is going to enable young people, to provide better job creation. So let's stop thinking that it's all for governments to create jobs. This is not. In fact, we can actually create jobs ourselves now, right? I am an entrepreneur. I started my company. I put money into my company myself. Every African can do the same, and we should provide the environment and the climate for them to do that, right? And it's important that we also support access to investments, access to trade that is also internally driven, so that we can support these businesses and support the job creation. So it's important that we do all of that. We make sure that the infrastructure is there. We make sure the access to finance is there. We tailor-made some of the initiatives, like the 10 Million Women Initiative we have to support women, to mainstream them into the future economies that can have more high value add. Is absolutely critical. And I think for me, it's very exciting. So untap the value that's in the digital economy, in the platform economy, make sure you have access to knowledge and skills that your counterparts in Asia or wherever also have, and then you can compete and actually generate more jobs and wealth creation as well. Thank you.